happy Mother's Day, everyone. I hope you all are celebrating the mothers in your world. I'm incredibly grateful to the 4 women who joined me for this episode to share their journey as well as engage in a conversation around the common narrative that we share, our collective narrative as women who choose to create a family on their own. And we also discuss community and the community that we have and the community that we create. And I hope that on this Mother's Day, you enjoy this very special gift from Define the Narrative podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to Define the Narrative. For this very special roundtable episode, I have brought together some key folks from our world. I will begin with Jane Mattis, who is the founder of singlemothersbychoice.org, and she is what I call the original mother. Welcome, Jane. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you.
And you're coming to us from New York today, so
That's right.
Zoom is a beautiful thing. And my next guest is Mikki Morrissette, who is the founder of choicemoms.org. She is also a publisher and editor for the Minnesota Women's Press, and she joins us from Minnesota. Welcome, Mikki.
Thank you.
My next guest is Sarah Kowalski, returning from season 1 of Define the Narrative. She is the author of Motherhood Reimagined. She has joined us, will be joining us. She will be Denver-based shortly. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks for having me.
And then finally, we have another publisher with us. We have Molly Bain, who is Next Gen Story Custom Publishing. She wrote a book about single parenthood, which is an anthology collection of stories of women from Canada who started families of their own. And you are coming to us from Vancouver Island. Welcome.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
I brought you all together here today to discuss the language that we use in this world. And I will just be very honest. When I first started researching this idea, of course, I found singlemothersbychoice.org, and I believe that that is the default. And I'm wondering if we could start with you, Jane, about how that name came about. And one of the things that I think is a theme to investigate in our conversation is choices that we make, even about language, are influenced by where we are in space and time, right? Your location, your time in history, and the dictionary changes frequently. And so just the connotation also of the year that it was and how that language was perceived in the world that you were living in at that time.
Right. Well, I was the person who got together the original small group of single mothers by choice, as we are now called, that met in my living room in 1981. So that was the time frame. And it's a long story, but we eventually realized we had to create some kind of this organization with a structure and a name, because we were getting all kinds of interest from people around the country and even Canada and abroad eventually. So we spent hours, literally hours, trying to come up with a name. It was very challenging to find a name because we didn't find anything that was perfect. And we wanted to emphasize the fact that it was a choice. So we did think about choice moms, actually. We decided that a lot of people, married and single, were choice moms. And then we wanted somebody that emphasized that we were single and making the choice. We decided that a single woman making a choice to be a mother was a single mother by choice. And that's what we landed on, and that's what we've kept. And it's followed by SMC in parentheses, which is actually our registered trademark at this point. But the SMC is a lot easier, to say and remember than singlemothersbychoice.org. So we do often refer to ourselves as SMC.
And how do you feel it was perceived in 1981, the name of your organization? I know you got a lot of press and there was a lot of interest. How do you feel it was perceived, especially compared to maybe how you were wondering it was going to be perceived?
Right. We didn't anticipate the shock that it seemed to generate early on, especially, and particularly from men. not so much from women, but men's reaction was that why would anybody choose to be single when they could have a man? It was like crazy idea. And we had a lot of work to do and tried to do it to say that this had nothing to do with liking men, not liking men. Half of our children were going to turn out to be men. It was just about the fact that we were single women and we were choosing to be mothers. And anything else was not relevant, really.
So you were trying to keep it independent of any other factors. It was just the idea of an independent decision to do this without really taking into consideration other cultural norms that might have been out there. Not necessarily even a rejection or a changing of. You were creating a new cultural idea.
Right. We were identifying who we were. And the only other single mothers at that time were divorced moms and teen moms. And we also wanted to somehow make a little distinction about that we were neither of those, because both of those have different issues and concerns than we did. So, yeah, we really felt that this was a unique term that we wanted to own. And it was shocking for a lot of people, and people were definitely.
And you mentioned that you got a lot of response from men. What was the response from women, out of curiosity?
Most women said, good for you. A lot of the older generation, much to our surprise, said, if I had had that choice, I really wouldn't have married my husband, or I wish I'd had such a choice. The older generation really was welcoming and celebrating of us. Our peers were a little bit more ambivalent. Like, some of them said, I don't know. I think maybe it's better to have a father, even though I'm not sure that, if I had to do it all over again, I would pick my husband. There were regrets from the people who were married, and disdain from people who were married, and worry from people who were married. What's this going to do to the children? How can the children survive without a man in the house? They're going to be juvenile delinquents. They're going to go to jail. They're going to be promiscuous in the case of girls. None of which turned out to be true. But there was all kinds of assumption and stereotyping of what a child would be like and what a family would be like without a man in the house. As if you couldn't have a man from outside the house loving your child too. I mean, that's just something nobody ever thought of, which was a great plus for my son.
It sounds like the fear was coming from those that had actually had to make a choice about how they were going to have a family or go about life, and maybe some sense of needing to validate what they had chosen, right? It was almost like them showing kind of what their fears were about it.
Sure, everybody feels like, I think most people at least feel they have to, defend their choice. And we really weren't talking about anybody else's choice. We weren't saying it was a good thing or a bad thing. We were just saying this is who we are and this is what we are doing. And that was it. And people reacted, of course, as people do, out of their own unique personal situations. Luckily, I was a
Jane,
therapist, so I didn't take this personally. I was.
yeah, your approach, I'm going to call the Switzerland approach, independent of everyone else. When I was investigating everything, of course, Jane, I found your organization, and I also found Mikki's organization of Choice Moms. What I think spoke to me was it was a different way. I had already started to be interested in the way it was described. I got out of the love of my life relationship to do this. And I have to admit, I wonder if the single part being taken out helped me, because when I look it up in the dictionary, single, the first definition as an adjective is only one, not one of several. But the second one is unmarried or not involved in a stable sexual relationship. And I wanted to divorce myself from that. So I really, really appreciated the choicemoms.org, even just the language of that. But both of your organizations were a great resource to me. So that brings us to you, Mikki, and you had children that were, younger at the time. Tell us a little bit about how you came about developing your organization and your choice of language.
Yeah, a big part of my journey was the fact that I realized after divorcing in my early 30s that I didn't want to rush into another relationship. So I was going to proactively have children on my own. I was 37 when my daughter was born in 1999. I was just shy of 42 when my son was born in 2004. And in the process of kind of readjusting, so I would never have been able to have a second child in New York City where I was living. I wouldn't have been able to afford it or have the space. But I did relocate back to my home state of Minnesota, where I was able to not only have space to have another child, but to spend some time working on a book. As a journalist, I had been interested in finding out, as a kind of when I started, Jane's son was a young adult, and I knew there was a whole generation of people that we could talk to show that they're not all screwed up. And then I also, as a journalist, wanted to, for my own sake, understand what it does mean to a child to grow up in a single parent home. What are the mitigating factors? How do we address some of those concerns? What does it mean to come from an anonymous donor, from adoption, from a known donor? So I wanted to dig into those things, but then in the process of this, I did come up with the name of the book was Choosing Single Motherhood, and I then realized that to shorten that to Choice Moms, it would put the emphasis on the fact that we were choosing to become mothers. We weren't choosing to be single. Some of us didn't care if we were single or not. Some really did not want to be single and be a mom, but were coming to this decision because of age. So in my case, it just kind of naturally evolved into the fact that we were proactively choosing, and therefore I came up with the term Choice Moms. And that became the name of the website then, and became the definition I put into the Choosing Single Motherhood book.
There's a lot of things in there that I want to call out. Number one, I think that we can all agree that there is a part of our draw to this call to action to support this world. And I know for me specifically, it was in the pandemic when I was seeing younger and younger women choosing and coming across Sarah's work about it being a first choice, which we'll talk about in a minute. And I joined some local Zoom mixers. And what I found was, about first grade, there's a breath of relief that everyone was sighing, that people started to go back to, I guess, as you were. And I had a 9-year-old, and I think I kind of realize, we do need to keep this momentum of supporting this work and the organization because it's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. So, Mikki, thank you for sharing that. It kind of, I think, validates Sarah and Molly and myself as we try to pick things up and broaden it. I think there's a lot of work to be done. Our kids are not screwed up. That's really great. The theme that we're getting as we move down the line is the idea about choice, which when I look up the word choice in the dictionary as a noun is an act of selecting or making a decision when faced with two or more possibilities. And I am starting to think that that is a really, really great word, because two or more possibilities, as I think that Sarah and Molly will add to it. It used to be some of us wanted to be in partnership and have our kids. And so it was more of a dilemma than it was a choice. Choice is a big one for that. And then your book, I will just, again, I think that literature and the more books that we have out there, the more stories that we tell, and collectively, there's almost a half a dozen books on this Zoom that I think we just can't say enough, because I bought and read every single book, and not everyone. I mean, everyone on the Zoom is quality, but there were some that it was like, oh, I am not an African giraffe, but the idea is there, and I think we need to continue. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to bring this conversation up is because the world is changing and that meaning is changing. And so, Mikki, I'll ask you, like I asked Jane, at the time you did it, so you were also in New York in 19
Yeah, I was there, up until I moved right after 9/11, so I left in 2002. I had been
And
there for
so
18 years.
for
Yeah.
18 years. And so, how do you feel that your choice and your family was received, not only by the community at large and your culture, moving from New York and back to Minnesota, right? Because those are two vastly different cultures. Also, maybe from within your own family.
Yeah, I was very worried about how both my grandmother and my mother would receive this. I knew my dad would be supportive. I wasn't sure about my mom because I knew she'd be concerned about the financial aspects of going ahead, and I was concerned about my grandmother who was very Catholic. In all cases, they were all incredibly supportive. They recognized that, I mean, in the case of my grandmother, she just simply said, "You're a very independent person, capable of doing what you need to do. Children are blessings." So I had no pushback, from my family, or friends. I did have very few friends at the time that had children, but the ones that did, again, kind of reiterated what a blessing it is to do. It's not easy, certainly, but it was well received. I know in the culture at large, this was a few years. I don't remember when the Dan Quayle Murphy Brown TV character thing happened. I think,
1990.
yeah. And so this I was a few years after that, and again, we'd had a full generation of people who had grown up in the single mother by choice, atmosphere. The Dan Quayle controversy, which refers to the fact that the Murphy Brown TV character was deciding to have a child. She had conceived accidentally and deciding to go ahead with the pregnancy and keep the child, and Dan Quayle was vice president at the time and thought that was sending a really bad message. So that had been a few years prior, but it didn't again affect a lot of my own circle. And when I interviewed people for the book, I did interview people who felt that there was some potential damage for children. I remember having a few debates. I remember being asked to be on the Bill O'Reilly show, who wanted me, similar to what Jane was saying earlier, wanted me to say that men are irrelevant. I wouldn't say that either. So I wasn't on the show because it wasn't controversial enough. There was certainly, and I did have, similar to what Jane said, there were some men who were just very confused by this option. But I didn't personally feel like I had a lot of pushback on it. I was a little more nervous when I was deciding to have a second child, because again, that is a financial, and as a freelance writer, I certainly wasn't making much money. But I also had solid support. I felt pretty lucky for the fact that I had that much support, because I know a lot of people don't. I recently was in Ireland and met one of the choice moms I've known there, who had a lot of pushback from her family and did not have any support.
Yeah, it's hard. And Mali's book also, I remember hearing the story of one of her contributors, so hopefully she'll share about that. And Mikki, that brings up an added vocabulary, right? So would we all agree that the Murphy Brown episode really brought to public the idea of single mom by chance, which again, I guess my wondering is, and we'll finish to get around the table, but I want to come back once we get everyone into the conversation about the line between what is it exactly that we consider to be the alignment of who we are, because there's strong thoughts. A teen mother is one thing, but I think that there are divorced mothers. I have married friends that want to call themselves, single mothers by chance, even though they're married. So when we finish the going around the table once, I would like to bring that back, because it is a cultural idea of the work that it takes. It sounds like, Mikki, you were not so worried about the cultural aspect of yours was more of like how to take care of your family and raise your children.
Yeah, it was a lot of the financial logistics. I'm not in a well-paid profession. So So that was a big part of it for me. What I would also like to drop into the conversation, when I did about 25 workshops around the country and in Toronto, I certainly met people from all different kinds of backgrounds. And I remember one in particular. She was a woman who had been raped and was pregnant. And again, there's an agonizing choice that you have to make regardless of your circumstances. And in her case, she was in her I'm not sure how old she was, but she was really trying to figure out, was this her chance to have a child, and could she be a mother to a child
Mm.
that was conceived from that. And again, whatever method or whatever way you've gotten to this question, you still have to be able to address the logistics of whether you can emotionally, financially, physically care for a child. So everybody's got to agonize over those choices, whether they're proactively doing it or not. I also remember 3 months into my pregnancy, after I boldly marched in. 3 months was a certain time in your hormones. I was like, oh my God, what have I done? So it's always a matter of, dealing with the logistics of what this choice means.
I always wonder if part of what influenced me was that my mother, at the age of 40, was told she was now going to be a single mother of three
Oh.
children by virtue of non-participation of her partner. So it is hard.
Mm.
It is hard, and every decision is difficult. We could also talk about where you are pre-conception, during conception, after conception. And I know, Mikki, you've had relationships and been in and out of it, and the stability. I think one idea is the stability that your family stays. And so maybe that's another one that we can talk about. So thank you for that contribution. Jane.
Can I just wanted to clarify one thing which is often misunderstood. My pregnancy was an accident, but it never occurred to me that the continuation was not a choice. I mean, I was in New York City. Abortion was not controversial at the time. I had a definite choice, and I didn't really think about it for very long. I was 36, and I was clear that this was some sort of gift. But I think, there's a choice whether it's planned or unplanned.
Thank you, Jane. I don't think I knew that about you. How did I miss that? I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think that brings a really nice color to the conversation. Definitely a deeper understanding of the Murphy Brown decision 10 years before Murphy Brown did, right? Pandemic is where I discovered you, my friend. And what I will say is that you also have a book and you have a business. You are a coach. You are all kinds of things to all women in this world. I would like to invite you to tell it in your own words, because you can do it more justice than I can. But I also would like for you to share for me what was just a mind-blowing idea, which was that it can be a first choice if you are choosing to create a family on your own, to be a single mother by choice, to be a choice mom. And this is what I saw in the pandemic, is that there are women in their mid-20s that are deciding as a separate entity to their romantic life that they wanted to have children and they wanted to have it on their own, and they were choosing this first. Tell us a little bit about your story, how you got here, and how you really advocate for that idea, and maybe even the idea of how double donorship comes into the story as well.
I feel like I have a very classic story. I was a lawyer, very committed to my career, kind of had put partnership on the back burner, woke up one day, 39, and a mentor said, do you want to have a kid? And I was like, what? And I feel like I had been so focused on partnership, and I had even come up with this idea in my head that I wasn't, even though I had been baby obsessed as a child, somewhere in the mix of becoming a lawyer and this kind of driven life, and struggling in partnership, came up with this idea that I wasn't going to decide whether or not I wanted to have kids until I found the partner. And so when someone said to me, I felt like I buried that desire to have a child so incredibly deeply, because I felt like it would scare men away. and that like most men didn't really want kids. And if I led with that, I wasn't going to find partnership, and partnership felt so important. And so when this mentor sort of said to me, you know, you have to figure out whether or not you want a kid, I felt like so incredibly blown away. And I felt like I had to start with, do I want to be a mother? And then I had to ask myself, do I want to be a mother if it means doing it alone because there's no partner on the horizon? And, you know, my mentor pointed out, like, you're 39, now I was 40, like, you don't really have time to go through what would be a nice amount of relationship time to really decide to have a child with someone. So you're probably looking at doing this alone. And then even within that sort of exploration, I did some initial testing, fertility testing, and found out that I was actually infertile, or more than likely infertile. And so then I had to decide whether or not I wanted to have a baby if it meant doing it with double donors. So I felt like each of those was like a letting go and a reimagining of what I thought motherhood was. And each one felt like just giving up so much of what the fairy tale of what I had been fed as a child and throughout my life. And so that's why I came up with the title Motherhood Reimagined for my book and later podcast and business. But I think along the way, and I really resonate with the single mom by choice, although I do think that, like, as a term, but I think that most women who come to this choice are feeling backed against a wall, and it feels like a failure that they're doing this. And so they're like, what? It's not a choice. I don't have a choice. That's the only reason I'm doing this. And I love being a single mom by choice so much. And I feel like it's such an amazing model that makes sense. And so I really feel like I'm on a mission to really allow it to be something as a younger women, not just backed against a wall, but it's like a legitimate choice from early on, that like when you're in your 20s, you ask yourself, what do I want? Would I like to partner in relationship, or would I rather have kids outside of relationship? And I just don't think we're really given, I think more and more women are being given that choice. But I think oftentimes when I say that to women, if I even say like, this can be an empowered choice, like I can't tell you the number of clients that like sort of fall off their chair being like, what, empowered? No way. I feel like, yes, I completely agree. There's more and more young women doing it. I have a close friend who was 22, I think, when she did it, and more women coming to me that are young. The fact that it's knocked women over when I say it could be empowered, you could feel amazing about this. And you also, part of the reason I started my podcast was to sort of convey that there's all these women who've chosen this, and one, don't regret using double donors. They don't feel in any way not connected to their child. They feel like they got the child they were meant to have. And I really wanted to capture that sort of over and over and over again. But I also have asked all my guests, if you have the chance to do it over again, would you choose to do it alone? And 24 out of 25 women that I asked in my first season said, I would choose to do it alone again. And I think that's so incredibly powerful, that women are like, this is awesome. Like, this isn't a second choice or a not great or something less than.
I'm wondering how many of you in the room, having done it and knowing that culturally the idea was that you have a family in partnership, how many of you had a similar feeling that you were like, oh my gosh, I wish I had known it was this great because I made this work out pretty well. And if I knew that all choices being equal, are there any of you that would have done it that way as well?
I can tell you something that is maybe of use here. Now that I'm watching my son and daughter-in-law raise their child in a great relationship, I see how wonderful it can be to raise a child in a good relationship. I didn't know there was such a thing before, and I was clueless. I don't think I could have done it with a relationship. So I made the right choice for me, for sure, but I also think watching my grandson's parenting, it's a wonderful thing to have love from two parents also.
Mhm.
It's not that one is better or worse, but I think everybody has to figure out what's right for them.
And it also brings different things into the picture. I know that my biggest worry was that my kids wouldn't know what it was like to be in a committed relationship with somebody, because I was not. I was married at some point for a few years, when basically I met him when I was 5 months pregnant with my second. But that was my biggest fear, and it took them getting to the ages of what they are now, which is 18 and 23, to realize, yeah, no, that's fine too, because they learn from the example of what your relationship with them is. That was when I interviewed a lot of the adult choice kids. I know that they felt like they had very healthy relationships, different relationships with their parents. It's less hierarchical probably than if there's a partner in the picture, but it also doesn't mean that they feel incapable of having relationships. My son and daughter now have both experienced that. So I think it's just, you learn different things from different dynamics, and it's all fine. Yeah, you know.
I find it curious because as I think back, and maybe I was concerned, but I think between Jane and Mikki, you quelled my fears about the ability to have male influences. And, a single parent home is not going to raise a gay male child. And I wasn't so worried about that. But to your point, Sarah, for me, I didn't have my first big, real, true long relationship until I was in my 30s. And I was like you, I was 37, approaching 38. And what we had said we wanted was not happening. We were waiting for the housing crash. And unfortunately, as smart of an idea as that is, my body was not aligned to the financial crisis. And it was the idea that I did not believe that I could, in 18 months, which is about how much time I could give myself. And I now know that that would have probably taken me into egg donorship, because I almost didn't conceive as well. For me, as a child of divorce at the age of 11 and 12, my biggest fear was and it's not like deep abandon, like, my father left and never came back. It was more of like, all of a sudden my father wanted to have a relationship with me at levels that he didn't do when my family was cohesive. And so my sense of abandonment was kind of like this come and go idea that really didn't take into account what I wanted from that parental relationship. And I didn't want that for my child. And I think for me, that was a tipping point. And back to what I was saying with Mikki is, it's the base solid that I knew that I could guarantee to the child, and that whatever was added and taken away that is life, right? Things are added and taken away. So I think that that's really important. And so, Sarah, how was your choice to come to motherhood and even the idea of double donorship? Because when I was conceiving in 2010, 2011, I do remember, and I will say, I think it is starting to be common recommendation that women freeze their eggs. I think that we'll see in 10 years that it's just like getting the HPV vaccine. But the idea of having a donor egg or a donor embryo was not only a whole different level, but cost prohibitive actually at that point, because I don't think that embryo donation was so prolific at that time. So how was it for you in the culture that you were in? And at the time you were in San Francisco, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. I would think I was already in Oakland, but yes, Bay Area. Yeah, it took me a long time to wrap my head around, and it felt like, okay, well, it's like, isn't this the equivalent of adoption? If I'm not going to share genetics, then why am I doing this? And I did have a friend who was like very, very committed to adoption, and she flat out was like, I don't get it. I can't support you. I don't see why you won't adopt. For me, it was more of still am deeply involved in spiritual practice. And for me, it was like, okay, and somatic practice. And I felt like carrying a child and having that child inside my body, experiencing my emotions, my biochemistry felt incredibly important to me. And I had this weird like synergy of my spiritual teacher being like, it's 90% spirit anyways, like 10% genetics was sort of his kind of feel. And then I had a friend who was a neuroscientist and sort of geneticist, and he also said to me, like, epigenetics is this whole new thing, and we are going to find out that the actual underlying genetic code has nothing to, or very little to do with it, that growing inside your body is a much bigger piece of the picture. And so this kind of both like the spiritual aspect and this kind of more scientific aspect kind of colliding really, and it just resonated with me. And I think I had also like just wanted to be pregnant and experience that so badly, and being able to have that connection internally and sort of have, I think it's like a lack of, you're letting go of so many aspects of control. So it was like one piece of control after another, but that was like the one I just couldn't let go of. And it felt like it did give me the control that I could wrap my brain around. And I feel like I had heard about embryo donation, and it just felt super complicated and hard to figure out. And I just got this so as I started to go through it, I started noticing like there were certain avenues that I would start to research and I would just get exhausted. And then other areas I would start to research and lights would go off and things would fall into place. And so I started researching embryo donation, and sort of I was like, I just can't. Whereas I started researching, I had a friend who was an OBGYN in Chile, and she was like, you could go there and it would be $5,000. And so I went on this, it kind of opened this world of IVF tourism for me. And in Chile, you cannot choose the donors, that you just tell them sort of like, this is what I look like. And they're like, here's your match. And I decided, again, that was like a level of control I could not let go of. And so I ended up going to Mexico, where you could see pictures of the egg donor, and I sort of like to say, they told me no one had ever shipped sperm from the United States to Mexico prior. And I was like, I'm not going to take no for an answer. I'm going to figure this out. So I shipped sperm from Mexico so I could have an identity, like open ID donor from the US. And that was a lot more affordable. And at the time, they lifted the experimental label on frozen eggs as I was doing this. So they had no statistics on frozen eggs at the time. And again, I was just like, I just can't do it. So that was kind of the path of how I ended up there to use double donors in Mexico.
That's amazing. So you didn't get the embryo double donor, you got the donors separately and had the embryos created.
Yeah. And again, it felt like I talk to women all the time. It's just like, what are you willing to let go of control? And I think it's just like, how much can you let go? And that was just like, I don't know, being able to, some people would say that's playing God or it's too whatever, but I just was like, I wanted to see like the triad kind of, like I wanted to be a part of the equation and pick both of the donors in relationship to myself. And that was possible and pretty easy in Mexico to do that. So that's how I ended up with that choice.
And what was the response from your friends and family? How did they receive? And how much did you reveal of how deeply did you go in what you were doing?
Yeah, I was pretty open. I felt like I did not want to convey shame. Like last thing in the world I wanted to do was convey any shame. And so it felt like unless I fully put this out there and I'm like a complete open book about it, I'm conveying some sort of shame. And so I have been incredibly vocal. it's an interesting thing. Like, people forget. My kid looks nothing like me, and people like project onto him that he looks like me. And people will be like, oh, well, your genetics, like, he's dyslexic. And they're like, oh,
it runs in your family, right?
And I'm like, no, like, forget, I don't share any genes with him. And they're like, oh, right, oh, weird, right? So I think it's like a very bizarre thing that people want to assume you share genetics. And they want to assume you look like your child. So like, they find similarities in us that I'm like, you're like, I just laugh. So
that could be a whole episode, because just a little non sequitur. So my child found puberty in the pandemic. And so he just turned 11 last month, and he's 5'4". And it's so funny because people will meet us, and I'm over the how tall is his dad, right? I'm like, well, he doesn't have a dad, but you mean the donor. But the funniest part is, it's not the donor. The donor was 5'10". It's my father's family. All of the men are over 6 feet tall. So I can even circumvent, and I don't even have to address that part. And I'm just like, oh, it's my father's family. To this conversation of language. And I want to get to Molly so she can jump in the conversation. But another thing I want to bring back is labels and our need to categorize and sort things in life just to make sense of it. And to what point does the language cross over to being a stereotype or assumptions that just flat out aren't true? But it sounds like, Sarah, that your story, that you are just someone that the need to be very vulnerable and honest, because you have a very tough story in what you had to deal with. And I know that you're a very grounded person. So in that, you stepped very carefully. And it sounds like those around you understood that about you and knew that if this was a decision and a journey that you were traveling, that it was not something that you were taking lightly.
From the day my mentor said to me, like, you should consider having kids, to the day I came to terms with using an egg donor was like a year and a half. So I was like deeply, deeply in it for a long time. So I think people were like, oh my God, have a baby already.
Right? Yeah, I think it took me a couple of years as well. Okay, Molly, it's for you. And so you came into my life because you have done what I am hoping to do on a larger scale. And maybe this will spark. In fact, so many ideas are coming in this conversation. You put together an anthology of women from Canada who have chosen this pathway. And I just have to say, in such a multicultural country, you have women that have backgrounds that are not many generations Native Canadian, right? And the culture barriers that they have had to face are really do speak deeper than the words that are used, but really to the change in what is traditional. But also, your book uses the term parenthood, and you have a very specific idea as to why you chose that word over motherhood or mom. And so I hope that you can share a little bit about your story and how you came to create your own family and the name of the book and that project.
Sure. So lovely to be here. I have to say, having Jane and Mikki both on this call is amazing, because your books were really foundational to my journey when I first started. So lovely to meet you. And so I have also, I think, Sarah, you said the classic story. I have a bit of the classic story myself. And what I started doing in my late 30s, when one of my sisters said to me, you could do this on your own, maybe. And I said, oh, wow, people do that? Could I do that? I basically started interviewing my friends and acquaintances. I didn't know anyone personally, but I started talking to different people and wanting to hear their stories and sit in their kitchen and look at them in the eyes and say, do you regret it? Like, how is this going? So that was a big part of my journey. And so my daughter is 3 now. So she was conceived in 2019. So perhaps the youngest of the kiddos in this group. And what happened, I'm a publisher. I do custom family history books. And so I've learned that process. And I really wanted to pull together a diverse range of stories. So I wanted to have many options available when in terms of exploring what the story could look like. So for me, that was many options in terms of fertility journeys, many options in terms of gender too. So we're in a new era in terms of the binaries of gender, for one. So wanted it to be open to folks who identify as female and folks who have a uterus and don't identify as female, for example, and folks who are non-binary or other gendered and interested in having a child. Folks who've had a child by surrogacy, a whole range of options, and men, cisgendered men who have had a child on their own. So the intention of Parenthood was from the very get-go. And interestingly enough, or perhaps just the way things go, I put out the call on a group called Single Parents by Choice Canada. Single Mothers by Choice Canada. That error was my error. I default to the gender neutral, but the group was actually women. And so we actually have, as far as I know, all women, and as far as I know, cisgendered women in the book. We do have a lot of diversity, including someone from a Bangladeshi family. She's the first Bangladeshi woman she knows of who ever has told the story of being a single parent by choice. And she had ended up having twins, and she was fearful of her family's reaction for a whole bunch of reasons, and they've ended up really being supportive. So there's just this whole range of journeys of different people's experiences of what it means to be a single parent by choice. So holding that openness is where the title for the book came from. But actually, I don't know if I told you this, Anne, when we talked last time. I actually did a poll for what the title should be for the book. And we had a long dialogue. So solo versus single, do we use the word single? Do we not? Do we put Canada in there? All sorts of things. It was a really fascinating discussion. So I'm really happy to be chatting more about such things today. They matter. Mm-hmm.
So the title of your book, did you abide by what was the highest vote, or did you just take it as input?
I took it as kind of both. I think I actually did a first poll and then a second poll, but I went and looked back at it before our chat here just to check. So I was like, what else was the top? The other one that people loved was The Right Choice for Me. And if I were to re-release it, I would do that, because look, we're all nodding our heads. And I think that's real. In the end, we wanted it to be, if you glance at it, we wanted to know what it's about. Race choice for me could be a bunch of different choices in life. So that was a bit too vague. But this idea of the right choice for me was really big. And then also, I Did It Solo was a really popular title. And the word solo was interesting in relation to what Mikki and Jane and Sarah have talked about, because the word solo, it wasn't single. It was like, I am an only parent. I'm a solo parent. People wanted only or solo, something that says, there's one of me. That's the core, as you said, Anne, of the family. And I may or may not be in relationship. So it's not about my marital status or whether I have a sexual relationship with another human being. It's about, I am doing this on my own. And interestingly, in the debate in this with this group around the title, the word solo also can be used by moms whose partner is, or parents whose partner is away for 2 weeks. I'm parenting solo right now is also a very common use of that word. So it is fascinating. In the end, we fell back to what has been set up as a foundation by folks like Jane and Mikki, right? That word choice being really important. So the title was Choosing Single Parenthood. However, in the subtitle, we used solo because people loved it so much. So the subtitle was Stories from Solo Parents by Choice, so that we had that, honored that word and how much it meant to folks.
I think we have the US edition that I need to get the call to action, and hopefully this will spark enough traffic that we can do it. And so I think the big idea that I'd like to invite everyone to come into, because it really is just a beautiful prism of how we came to be the parents that we are. And I feel myself carefully trying to find the words that I use. There's two ideas. Number one, I think that it is fair to say that choice is definitely a huge part of what is in the decision making and the choices that we make, how we all came to be parents, mothers, and the families that we created. I know for me, I when I think about language, I think about whether it's has a negative or positive connotation, right? Even just the word not. Again, single, as Molly said, like, I don't my sexual relationship status is already something that I'm a little protective of in my life. I feel like a teenager that I'm defending myself. And so for me, something that I came up with, it was the idea of creating a family on your own, which is a statement of fact, because I do know women who conceived and went on the journey of having a child on their own and met a partner while they were pregnant, right? And I think that the choice and the decision that you started on, where you start and where you end up, are can be completely different. And I think for me, it was again that idea of I'm an only parent. I tend to start using that one more in the realm of like school and things like that, because it is that idea of I don't want us to counterculture. And so I'm wondering what your ideas are about the use of language and even the ideas to describe what is really, again, if we think back to where Jane was, single moms, divorced moms, women who find themselves pregnant. I'm sure, there's the idea of rape, but but to come all the way to where we are, that the world has changed such that even the way the parent is identifying, and I'll just put this out there, the last person I had a relationship with said, when I told him that I had had my child on my own, he said, I wish I could have a child on my own because I would have done it instead of my 21-year marriage. So I do think that there's enough proof in the pudding, Jane and Mickey and Sarah and Molly, for this. What are your thoughts about how we continue to be inclusive, yet allow people to have a choice in the words that they use? Because some people feel a very strong need to align to a certain subgroup of our world. Um, and what are your thoughts about if you could have influence over the way the world saw it, what would you love to see the world open up to? And I'll just open it up to whoever wants to jump in first. And I saw Mickey unmute herself.
Yeah, I two things that I'll bring up is one, from an early age when my daughter was in kindergarten, they have that family tree exercise, and we wanted to reimagine that. And so traditionally at Thanksgiving every year, the kids and I do a flower where instead of a tree where there's this side and there's that side, you reimagine yourself as a flower with the thing in the center. You've got petals of the people that are really important to you. You've got the leaves that are other people that are important to you, but might not be, related family people. You've got the stem, you've got the roots, to be able to reimagine the fact that you are part of a village, not just there's this side of the family and that side of the family. And related to that is the fact that, I think one of the things I said years back was that, the goal of parenting is not to be a single or a nuclear family parent. The goal is to build a village around your child so that they have access to the most mentorship, the most love, the most experiences that they can. And if people could kind of see that that's the way our world could be constructed, there are cultures where village is a much bigger part, multi-generation is a much bigger part. We've gotten into this nuclear binary kind of way of thinking in the US, that this is our family, this is our community, this is it. And so for me, it would be about reimagining the potential of the fact that we're connected to everybody and our children can benefit from that.
So not so much the focus on how you came to create your family, but more of the community that you build around it as you nurture and grow these humans.
Yeah, because we are consciously choosing to build a family, but then we can also consciously choose the people we want to be connected with.
Jane, I see you shaking your head in agreement to that.
Yeah, I do a lot of consults with single moms and prospective single moms by choice, and they always ask this kind of question, And I agree very much with what Mikki said, but the way I formulated or presented is that I see family as the people who love you. And that can be chosen or genetic or a combo of both. And that to me is what a family is. And there's no, I mean, I was the only child in a family that was pretty disconnected. And so it was very important to me to build a family around my son of loving people. And when he actually walked down the aisle when he was getting married, I accompanied him. And right behind him were the people we call his godparents who kind of helped me raise him. So he requested that they also walk down the aisle at that moment because they were a very important part of his life. So it was really, kind of a visual presentation of what these people are not blood relatives. They weren't even religious godparents in the true sense of them. They were very important people in his life. And there were a lot of those people at the wedding and in our life. And I'm very grateful that we had the option and the ability to, excuse me, to create this kind of chosen family.
And Jane, is that part of what had you start the organization of the women in your home, is to start trying to build that community?
Totally. I knew that nobody else could understand it as much as other women who were going through it. And I really was right. I mean, we met for total strangers, 7 of us, and we couldn't stop talking. And it just went on like that for many years till we all kind of outgrew that need. But the need for a community was the reason that I started it. And I also wanted my son to know other kids that were growing up in a family where there was no daddy. So that was also a big reason. But, it came out of my own need first.
Can I jump in? I just think there's something interesting that Sarah said earlier. You said something like there was a fairy tale of what was meant to have happened. And I've been reading fairy tales a lot recently, or tales to my daughter. And it's interesting how many of those narratives have a mother and a father and 2 children and sometimes a dog. Like really, they have these stereotypes. And so I actually edit them as I read them sometimes. And I make the father an uncle, or I make someone bring those other characters in. And I think this idea of chosen family, which really comes from the queer community, because for a long time, if you have 2 moms or 2 dads, genetics can't be the only thing that define your family. And there's this need to kind of say, we choose this family. For me, I didn't have a baby shower. I had a gathering of aunties and uncles. And so we had this big camp out, and I had some really intentional conversations with friends to say, can you be an auntie and or an uncle to this child that's coming into the world? And so I think there's so much potential in reimagining what stories, what fairy tales our children start to imagine. Are they all 1 man, 1 woman, 2 children? Perhaps not. Perhaps there are other options.
I think that's a big one, because I know also life changes us, right? For me, I'm in California and I'm from Alabama, and my mother was my best friend, and she was here when my son was born. And one of my very best friends that was there at the birth, I said, "You saw him come out of me. You are now his godmother, whether you want to be called that or not." But unexpectedly, I lost both of my parents before my son was 5, and with that was my community, which is my family. It sometimes it changes, right? Even just the gatherings that you do. And the pandemic has caused people. My very first friend in California, that was my Thanksgiving, unrelated to COVID, unexpectedly passed away. And so, as there are a lot of women who are starting this journey, have started it, there are women who are at different points along the way and are having to reimagine or re choose the family or the community that they build. And I'm going to be very honest with all of you, and I feel safe to say this. It has been really hard because I lost my mom in 2016, and the pandemic was just I feel like I kind of did that grieving. And then to lose, another very best friend, the isolation of the pandemic was really hard. And Zoom has been a beautiful thing. I do know that there's 2 areas that I have found a new sense of community. One of them is in the donor sibling registry. And I knew one of the donor moms before I was even pregnant. and our kids had gotten together, and we expanded the get together this past summer to another family of a gay couple. And I do think there's, Mikki, it's this idea of being able to move in between the groups that you create, because there is this bond of those that want to participate in that connection of sharing a donor. There's also a very understood idea between another only parent that's a mom and myself in that group, that when you have two parents that tend to have, even if they're same sex, more of a traditional style with other extended family, it's hard to, you have to take a minute and consider what everyone else's culture is for family, because that community that you are creating, I mean, even if we take the holiday in the US this week, some people are off doing it with whatever family they've defined, and it doesn't mean that they're not part of the community. So there's this idea of even trying to create that community, and I know you've done that really well. What are your thoughts about how to be resilient when your community or your group changes and you're looking for the new?
Yeah, I like to think of the fact that I've, sort of reinvented my communities as I go along, which we all do. You're in your parents' home, then you're off to college or the trades or work life. You start experiencing travel, you start opening up your perspectives a little bit. So I feel like I've been really blessed, especially as a journalist, that I'm continually talking to new people who have different perspectives than my own. And I have no problem with seeing outside the box of what family borders might be. And for me, I know that that's one of the things that I really wanted to gift to my children as well. The fact that, you proactively build things. You're not just passively, connected to people. So I know, I mean, and I guess I'll throw in something we haven't talked about as much, although we did a bit at the beginning, just partnerships and relationships and sexual intimacy and things completely adjusted over time, depending on, the fact that I centered my kids. I did not want to have a full-time relationship. I've had, a series of small-term, short-term relationships because I didn't want them to take center stage. But they all certainly served a purpose of, either just going out and having fun, having dinner with somebody, whatever it might be. But then, that all evolves. And so now that I'm an empty nester, now I'm looking at that aspect of my own life and realizing, okay, now it's time to be proactive about having a partner, which I just didn't want while I was focused on being a mom. I didn't want to change the dynamics in that way. So I don't know if that quite answers your question, but that's where I'll jump in and everybody else can add how they've built
Yeah,
their.
yeah, it sounds like curiosity, that if you lead with curiosity, then it helps you get to know what other people think and how they relate, and that's how you continually find connection with others.
Mhm. Maybe I'll jump in here because I feel this is a really big one for me in terms of rebuilding community. So I had my daughter sick, and then when she was 6 months old, the pandemic hit. And then soon after, so there was the pandemic happening. I ended up moving to Nanaimo when my father was ill and then ended up passing away. So I moved to a new city. I had the pandemic and I had an infant child. So these three things completely changed my social circles in some big ways. But the thing I had decided when I first conceived my daughter and continue to decide to do now is to live in community. And I know it's not for everyone, but I like to share my home. And so in Vancouver, we had a house of 6 folks, including myself and my daughter. And here we've done the same. So we have people sharing the house, and it feeds from what I heard from the woman I talked to. But when I was considering this, one of the big themes of what they shared was that they felt lonely, especially in the evenings when the child had gone to bed. And so having housemates means that I have people around to do a movie night with sometimes. And I don't need to rely on a babysitter to do that kind of thing. And I can go to the house if I need to in the evening to visit my mother or do whatever I need to do. Or ideally go for a date. That part of my life, I have nothing to speak of. I have a 3-year-old. I have no time time for dating. But I think the housing community part of it.
You can do a sleepover. The first night you can do a sleepover. There's a window, I'll just say, between like 5 and 8. And I'll tell you, I am hardcore in the my child thinks that I'm his girlfriend stage. So I don't know that I can get more than a movie out of it. But Mikki, I know you've done that as well. And maybe that's another conversation for me, because I've struggled even just to be a roommate. I've lived by myself most of my life. It sounds like, Jane, maybe you and I have conversations about kind of our independence and being the only ones in our world and how we relate. And I love that, though, Jane, that idea that we can make a choice of, it is who we are and how we're raised. It's what we're exposed to and the choices that we make. And I just think it's really beautiful that you're able to see that there is a word that is in all of this that maybe we need to start encouraging to leave out, and that is the idea of judgment. It is just a pathway. Just when I say just it is a pathway as other pathways have had, and tradition is just the pathway that many people were expected to take. And I find it beautiful that you see that your son's pathway. And I think you bring it up, and it does speak to the housemate idea. It is building a loving community, right, where your children know how to negotiate relationships and people and feel nurtured and loved. And then Sarah, you're relocating, right? And so, what are your thoughts as you think about that, and how have you've done it before? How have you navigated that idea, and how will you?
Yeah, it's been really hard because we came to Mexico 4 years ago. And I feel like we were just getting our footing, making new friends and feeling really in community. And then the pandemic hit and we went, like, Mexico actually shut down so extremely. And my friends would not even say hello from across the street. They were so worried and nervous. So we were in such a level of isolation. I can't even, I couldn't even fathom it. And so I feel like our entire community fell apart, whereas that expat community can be very nurturing and envelop you very quickly, and that sort of fell apart. And then I feel like we've been struggling to find our footing since then. And then I felt I think similarly, very lonely, and really had to contemplate how do you make community and how do you find that? And then it's like the world is my oyster. I'm self-employed. I'm not very close to my family. I don't have a partner whose job I'm worrying about. So I've been looking at the entire world of where to move to. And I've been to so many cities, I cannot even tell you, to explore. But it's that question of how in the world I feel like there's been a bit of a reflection of what did I do wrong that I felt not in community? It's a weird dichotomy because we also live in this amazing gated community where the kids run free. People come and knock on our door all the time, and the kids run out, or if you're bored, you go outside and someone inevitably is on their porch. And it's my idyllic co-housing essentially. I have my own space but can go outside. I feel like that is what we all that is the wave of the future and what we all need. But where can I find that elsewhere? And what do I proactively need to do to build community in Denver? I'm looking deeply at my values and where can I find those people that share those values. And I think I think when your child is very, very young, that need to relate to other people who have a life that is very similar to yours. I feel like there's these debates even in the single mom by choice sort of Facebook groups of are we letting in single moms by chance? Are we letting in single fathers by choice? And people, I feel want to be very narrow early on because there are big distinctions in how you came to do it that feel really significant. And then as your kids get older, that gets less and less important. And you're we're just parents, and you find we're just all in it. So I've been just looking at we joined the Unitarian Church and the Cub Scouts. We're doing karate, but I think it's something community. If you asked any of my friends what's my greatest skill in life, it's creating community. And then yet since the pandemic, I've been really struggling. So I've had to like really, really look at like, how do you create this and invite that into your life and be incredibly proactive about finding it. And I think it really is, it's like a job. You have to think of it as a job. And
Just like dating, right? Dating can be a job. And also I think time. I think the pandemic is something that is very unique. And things take time. And I know on the back end of it, it will potentially not seem that it lasted as long as it did. And so you bring up something that I'll put on the table for everyone to put their last thoughts out there. And it is the idea of in our community, whatever that community is, because it depends on who you ask. Is it that the earlier you are in the journey, you feel the need to be more narrow in the parameters because of a need to find people who are most similar, however specific, and that it becomes more broad as you get older? Is that what it is? Because I do think that that is part of my wondering is how do we inclusively honor people's need? Is it something that has to do with over time? Or I know there will always be groups like Mothers of Multiples or how to help me wrap my brain around it, your ideas of how you think this community, um, how do I make sense of grouping and sorting without being limiting but offering honorable spaces for people who might need that, without excluding the larger picture, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
I think we're all doing both, perhaps. I think we need to sometimes narrow in order to feel we have a special inner circle for ourselves, and also look outside to see if we can broaden our network and benefit from that. I think both are important. For Single Mothers by Choice as an organization, we wanted to make our place as a unique place. So our definition really, if you look into it on our website, which is actually, we have a brand new website coming up at the end of this week, if we're lucky, maybe next week. We have defined it as a child who doesn't have someone in the family they call daddy, because that's the one specific that we all share that's different from any other kind of single mom. And yet, a lot of people get all, as you said, all worried about too narrow, not narrow enough. I mean, it's really challenging. But as an organization is one thing, and as a person, for me, it's different because I don't want to narrow my circle. I just want, as many supportive, loving people around me as possible. So I don't personally like the narrowness. I don't use that except to protect the organization's definition. It's important that we do have something that we feel makes us unique as an organization.
Would you consider that to be need-based, Jane? That the need of the organization or the common, is it the common thread of the organization?
Well, it's the issue that is most concerning to our members is, how is the child affected by there not being a daddy? It's the one thing that distinguishes us, as I said, from all other kinds of single moms where there is a dad somewhere, maybe not living in the family, but there either is or was a dad somewhere. And it is important for the organization to have a definition in order to have a reason to exist. So we could broaden it, or but then we might lose what I think is important to many of the members early on, especially as they start to navigate what does it mean not to have a daddy in the home? And what does it mean to me as the mom? What does it mean to the child? And what does it mean in the community? How is it that the community relates to us as a family?
Mikki, what's your response to that? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, one of the other things that I had explored in my book was the fact that there's different ways that you become a mother, which could be through adoption, it could be through an anonymous donor, an open identity donor, a known donor. And certainly in my case, I used a known donor. I connected with some women at some point who also used known donors. But it was less of a consequence eventually about how that it's largely related to having legal conversations and things, but what eventually became much more of a driving factor for me and the community we had around us is, again, I was almost 42 when my son was born. With his circle of friends, if it was parents who had their kids in their 20s or 30s, we didn't really resonate in the same way as other parents that might have been very more nuclear family, but they were also later in life when they had their kids. And that became much more of a bonding space for me personally. And I connected there. So sort of the age factor that can come into play if you're, as we've discussed, I know from the discussion groups that I had, there were certainly women in their 20s that were just thinking, this is a great idea, I'm going to do this. But for a lot of us, it was a later in life thing, and being a later in life parent is different for your children and for yourself. So for me, the age became more of a way to connect with people, which I wouldn't have thought otherwise.
Yeah. And Mikki, I think of your generational time of becoming a parent as a big time where later parenting was a big topic, whether you were in partnership or not, and women's fertility. So I guess my final wondering, and Molly and Sarah jump in here, is number one, what I know for sure is that we all are working to support this community, and we need more. My trepidation of whether there was space has really changed to what are the needs. And I hear a need for us to be able to meet a lot of different needs with the singular focus that we are all women who made a choice to create a family on our own. And what we do with it afterwards, how we came to create it might be different, and our needs might be different depending on the time of life. But that unique bond is an experience in life that, although there might be women before Jane that did it, uh, to be able to say it and to walk about life as though that is the way it is supposed to be, as every family is supposed to be, is the bold statement that the gratitude that I find in our conversation as we continue to expand it and move the world forward in the way we think about the honor of raising children and we think about others' children. How would you like to see the support in our communities grow? What do you envision in the next, I will just say 12 months?
Interesting. I think I'm going to just, in terms of this question of how do we define and so on, I feel like you hit it the nail on the head for me, Mikki, when you said different conversations with different people at different times. So I can have a certain conversation with folks who have chosen a sperm donor, who have purchased sperm, because that's a set of choices and a thing to wrap one's head around. I can't have conversations about egg donation. That wasn't my journey. Others can have a really good conversation there. So there are many different conversations with different folks. And I can have good conversations actually with single parents about doing all of the household things on my own, on our own, so different conversations, different times. And for me, the conversation that is bubbling up most in my world is figuring out donor sibling family relationships. So my sperm donor donated to many other families thanks to the donor sperm database, Zytex in this case. They connected us, and we have a Facebook group, and there are many of us. This form of family I don't have stories for, I don't have imagination for. I want, this is the next anthology I would love to see. I'm not sure if I will make it, but I would love to just hear more stories. What do people do with this new form of family or a new form of genetic connection? How are people expressing that? What are they challenged by, enjoying? But that's a conversation that's relevant to one subgroup of our bigger community. And it's, there are many, I think, that we need to be having.
Yeah, so like a menu of conversations. Sarah, I'm going to give you the last word. What are your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I think it comes back to community. I feel like I did a call last night and everyone was like, where can I live and how can I afford it and have community around me and feel supported and create that chosen family? So I feel like that's maybe it's also because it's hot topic on my mind of where do you, I just think this notion of living in how we've isolated ourselves into these nuclear families. And now I think there's a movement away from that. And I think there's so many single moms that are like, where can we live in community together? How can we really support each other? How can we really have each other's backs? I think is a really important conversation.
Choice is the big word that I take from this. Choice is the word that wins. And community, right? Community, I think, is where, how do we define our community? Because it seems like we're making the decision, and we're helping women make the decision about it, but the bigger question is, how are you going to define your community? And that is not an in the box, right? You can't, it's not a this or a that. It's not a dilemma. It's definitely an ever evolving topic. Jane Mattis, Mikki Morrissette, Sarah Kowalski, Emily Bain. I just want to cry. Thank you for coming on and having this conversation. I will just say I want to come to all of your cities and have live events and be curious, Mikki and Jane. I want to be more inclusive to the fact that we are just one story, but I don't want to diminish the brave story that you continue to trudge for us. Um, Molly, I want to come to Vancouver, and Sarah, Denver is not that far from me. So thank you all for joining. And I deeply hope that this conversation really helps women of all stages and phases of parenthood and family to wrap their brain around what it means and the resources that are out there and the connections that they are invited to make, and knowing that we are all figuring it out and continue to figure it out as we move forward.
Thank you very much. This has been a
Yeah.
great conversation.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to talk with all of you.
Likewise.
Such an honor to meet you all, and thank you for your excellent facilitation, and thanks for keeping us on track.
I hope you all enjoyed this conversation. It just, every time I listen to it, it keeps me thinking about the choices that we make, the community that we're building, and it just seems to be growing. And I hope that it encourages you to let your voice be heard. I'm so interested in collecting all of our stories and all of our choices that we make, because as the world looks backwards, I want history to document the choices and the motherhood that we are all experiencing, and the bravery and the independence and the connection and the community. My guests can be found on social media and online. Single Mothers by Choice can be found on Facebook at Single Mothers by Choice and on Twitter at SingleSMC. Choice Moms can be found on Facebook, M. Morrissette1 or Choice Moms. You can also get Mikki's website at choicemoms.org, and she is on Twitter at Choice Moms. Sarah's Motherhood Reimagined SMC community, which includes monthly online meetups, guest excerpt interviews, and tons of how-to guides, can be found on her motherhoodreimagined.com website. Also, she's on Instagram at Motherhood Reimagined and Facebook at Motherhood Reimagined. If you're interested in Molly's book, Choosing Single Parenthood, Stories from Solo Parents by Choice, you can get that where books are found for purchase. And if you're interested in making a book about your family, go to nextgenstory.com and book a time to talk to Molly so that she can help you start creating your family story in a book. And please, please, please follow me on Instagram. I just want to stay connected to all of you. It is Define the Narrative. I am interested in collecting your ideas, your feedback, I want to do surveys. I love data and I want to share it. And I think that it would be amazing to have lots and lots of research around the collective narrative that is being created and co created out there. But for now, I wish you all a wonderful Mother's Day at whatever stage or phase of life you are in. Be curious, be bold, and know that you can define the narrative of your life. And today is the day to do that. So, what will it be?